Well, Osama Hamdan is a spokesman for Hamas. Earlier, he told Al Jazeera what the group wants for a ceasefire to take hold.
Our position was clear. We want a clear position that says a ceasefire will be including the lift of the siege completely on Gaza. If that happened, that means we are going to have a ceasefire. The one thing which is stopping the ceasefire, the Israelis are attacking the Palestinians. They have to stop their attack. They put Gaza under the siege. They have to stop that and make an end for this. It's clear that we are talking about doing the both things together. This is the clear guarantee which we are asking for. If they are serious in the ceasefire, they have to say clearly we are ready to stop our violation, our attack against Gaza on both levels, the civilian one by lifting the siege and the militant one by stopping bombing Gaza. This is the idea simply. We are not putting conditions, we are not talking about the preconditions, we are talking about the facts on the ground.
Well, joining me via Skype from Scotland is Daniel Levy, who's Middle East Director at the European Council on Foreign Relations. He's a former senior advisor to the Israeli government and a peace negotiator. Daniel Levy, so the initial 12-hour truce ended with a return to hostilities, and now we have Israel saying they'll agree to a 24-hour extension. What's the thinking behind Israel doing this, do you think?
Well, I think belatedly, unfortunately, the Israeli government is feeling that all is not well with its international allies. I think the United States and Europe mistakenly gave Israel a long rope, and we've been seeing all day the results of that in the devastating pictures of destruction coming out of Gaza. I think now you have a more concerted effort to say, draw this down, these pictures are unacceptable. The second part of this, Darren, is that I think you do have an Israeli government that is somewhat divided. And you do have a situation in which, if Israel gets sucked in deeper, then the 42 Israeli military casualties so far will increase in number. And it's very unclear that Israel will have an exit strategy. So I think it's a combination of those factors.
Yeah, and we're now hearing that the UN is offering Palestinian factions the same 24-hour ceasefire. Is Hamas likely to accept that from the UN rather than it seeming to come from Israel?
Well, I think there's been a very interesting development in the trajectory of this conflict throughout, which is early on you had an attempt to say, let's have a ceasefire that excludes Hamas, that isn't negotiated with Hamas and that humiliates Hamas. That was led by Egypt and Israel and the West. I think what you saw today in Paris was a very vivid demonstration of how much things had changed. You had the main interlocutors with Hamas, the Turkish and Qatari foreign ministers, I believe, in Paris with Secretary Kerry. The Egyptians weren't there. I think people belatedly understood that Egypt is really a party to this conflict. It has its own war with Hamas. It is only of limited use as a mediator. And therefore, I think that, yes, Hamas will be willing to extend the ceasefire. But the basic necessity here, and it's not a Hamas demand, I think it's a Gazan, as a position of most Gazans and Palestinians, and indeed should be of the world, is that if there is going to be a return to quiet, which is what needs to happen immediately, that has to then translate into some normalcy for Gazans, an end to the blockade. Otherwise, we'll be right back where we're beginning, and Israelis may have normalcy and quiet, but Palestinians in Gaza won't, and that will have to be addressed.
And it's an interesting point you make about the interlocutors who could bring peace. I mean, some say Egypt isn't an honest broker here, which is the point you're trying to make, that it wants to eradicate Hamas. How can the US and other players then leverage their diplomatic power against Israel?
Well, I think this is a question that relates to this very immediate conflict, but it also relates to an ongoing occupation that unfortunately American policy has, if anything, encouraged and defended and made possible. I don't think America is in a position to use its leverage with Israel, but in the big picture, but on occasions like this, it can certainly have an influence on Israeli thinking, as can the Europeans, who played an awful role during this conflict. The other thing, of course, is that they maintain no contacts with Hamas, which doesn't make them so useful. So I think the bigger picture is that perhaps both the results of the conflict so far, the absence of an exit strategy, and some elbow from its Western allies could encourage the Israelis to go for a more serious ceasefire. But beyond that, I fear we're going to be back exactly where we are in the bigger political picture between an occupied people and an occupying power.
A final thought from you, Daniel Levy. We've seen John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, put in a huge amount of legwork to bring a more robust peace initiative to the table. So how can they then bridge this gap that brings a ceasefire, that delivers Hamas its core demand of lifting the siege and also stops the rocket fire into Israel?
Well, I think the key thing here, Darren, is you have to create an incentive structure for Gazans, which says that if there is quiet and no rockets, then there will be a genuine change in their daily lives. Otherwise, you create precisely the wrong incentive structure. When the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank, President Abbas, etc., agreed to end armed resistance, have negotiations, cooperate with security, all they got is more settlements. So again, the wrong lessons are being sent. I do think this time around, if they're going to be serious, you will need the international community to intervene more actively with opening the blockade on Gaza. Perhaps you have some kind of port arrangement. And I think that anyone who thinks that Gaza can demilitarize, which may be a worthy goal in itself, has to address the question of who's going to protect the Palestinians. So if you really want this to end, you may need a protection force both in the West Bank and Gaza. I don't think the international community is ready for that, unfortunately.
Daniel Levy, thanks for talking to Al Jazeera.